So today is our first episode. It's not the episode we planned to begin with, but it's the episode that we need to begin with. And it is the episode that is responding to the election of Zoran Mamdani. And I want to begin this episode by saying that I'm sorry to all of the Jews in New York who feel lost right now, feel betrayed, who feel all, I can't even begin to imagine how you're feeling. I mean, I've seen what you've said on the internet, and I understand, and I've heard what you've told me. But that doesn't even really scratch the surface of what you must be going through as people who have lived in New York your whole lives, or you moved there recently, or you started a family there, or you were born there and you have fond memories of it. Whatever your relationship is with New York, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you're going through this. I wish I had more words to say than that, but I don't. And I want you to know that the pain that you're feeling and that anguish, we see you. We see you. And I also want to say to all of the people I grew up with, especially the Jews I grew up with, primarily the Jews I grew up with, who have been celebrating this victory and have been really enjoying it and enjoying the feeling of success that comes with your guy winning the election. I just want to remind you that there are other people in the world as well who have different relationships to things, and you might not necessarily want to be the person who's celebrating on a day that someone else is packing their bags to get ready to move out of New York. Something to consider. But I guess the crux of this episode and the crux of really what we're going to be talking about is what the hell happened? That how can we be so divided now when we grew up together? We went to the same schools, the same camps, the same synagogues. We went to the same bar mitzvahs. We heard the same music, the same party. We did the same dances. And how can we now stand so far apart that some of us are partying and acting like we just finally brought the third temple down to the streets of Manhattan, and some of us are looking at this like this is the end of the Jewish influence in New York. This is the end of Jewish welcome in New York. And I want to say that it actually, this has nothing to do with Mamdani himself or his policies. At the end of the day, he's 33, 34 years old. He's not much older than most of us kids. He's kind of a kid himself, and he hasn't done anything in office, right? So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say we have no idea what kind of a politician he's actually going to be. That said, what I'm feeling, and what I think a lot of people are feeling right now, is that we don't matter at all. That violence against Jews, especially against visible and religious Jews, doesn't matter at all to anyone. And to be perfectly honest, we already knew this before Mamdani was elected, because violence against the religious community has been going up exponentially for the past 4 years, or the past 10 years, but the article I read last night from the ADL was talking about the past 4 years. And no one's done anything about it. I mean, it's not like Andrew Cuomo is this great Philo-Semite who had been protecting the Jews while he was governor of New York. That's, okay. We know what the score was. It's been, it's been a long siege for the Jews in New York and for the Jews all over the world. And, if you've been paying attention to anti-Semitic violence in New York, you might remember the stabbings in Muncie. You might remember the yeshiva students getting attacked on the street. You might remember these things. But if you don't pay attention to the religious community because they're not on social media and they're not posting and they're not in the, they're in the Orthodox world, you can read about them in yeshiva world, but you're not going to read about an attack in Muncie in the New York Times. Unless, of course, it was done by a right-wing anti-Semite. That's a whole other story. But the violence against New York Jews has been growing for so long, and no one has done anything about it. No one's said anything about it. No one's even made, there's maybe they made a token effort. I mean, there was, here and there, maybe they did something, but like, it's the number one cause of hate crimes in America is being Jewish. Number one cause of hate crimes in New York is being Jewish, being visibly Jewish. And now everyone on the internet is telling us like, hey, actually anti-Semitism is not such a big deal. It's not so bad. Kind of sitting here like, are you kidding me? Have you not seen what's happened over the past 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, however many, whenever you got radicalized or you got woke to anti-Semitism, it's impossible to imagine. How could people not see this? And I think the simple answer is because they just don't. Meaning you can't see something that isn't in front of you. So if you don't wear a kippah outside, you're not going to see the way that the world treats people who do wear kippot. If you don't walk around in in Orthodox neighborhoods, you don't see what it's like when people are driving around on Shabbat and harassing people on the street. If you look down on Hasidic people and Haredi people and you don't think about them and they don't matter to you, whatever happens in their communities is going to be totally irrelevant to you, right? Who cares? Or even, I can even be much more forgiving and understanding than that, which is if you grew up in a reformer conservative world, Jew, and you were like a proud Jew, it's very possible you just never had any interaction with the Orthodox world. Not out of any disdain or any dislike or anything like that, just simply that we live in different places, right? And so it's possible that you could be a 35-year-old Jew living in New York who's lived there your whole life and you've never seen, actual anti-Semitism before you. Of course, we'd say, well, what were you thinking about during Columbia last year or when all of that stuff was going on? There's a million and one ways to rationalize it, right? I mean, again, for one thing, if you were watching the mainstream news, you weren't hearing about the violence against the Jews. And so here we are, that Mamdani has been elected, and the Jewish world, especially in New York, is split. It's not split evenly, but it is split emotionally. What I mean by that is something like 70% of Jews voted against Mamdani and something like 30% voted for him. So you have more than twice as many people who are opposed to, if we're coming at this from the perspective of, we don't know anything about Mamdani's politics, we only know that he has tremendous proximity to the Intifada, to the idea of Intifada, and he's not opposed to Intifada. And if we take that to mean, well, Intifadas we think about that as the killing of Jews in the street, right? We'll look at this and say, well, it's pretty remarkable that the city of New York is now comfortable voting for someone who's comfortable with terrorism in the street. That's what's, I think, really disconcerting to everybody, is like 9/11 was not that long ago. And the reality is that terrorism is now more popular than anti-terrorism. That if you were I think that more people in New York realistically would support terrorist freedom fighters, resistance fighters, whatever you want to call them, over the NYPD. Certainly over the National Guard or ICE or something like that. And I'm sorry, it's hard. It's hard to really think about all of the different things that this election is is kind of signaling to us. And to be perfectly honest, I don't want to be making this video right now. I just want to kind of pretend that this is not happening just for a little bit, because he's not even mayor yet, right? Like, we have another 4 years ahead of us to basically be fighting this. And it's exhausting to think about that coming after 2 years of fighting this war in Gaza and also on the internet. We have another 4 years of this coming in, with progressive politics, with his rise, because, if you've been looking at this, you see that all of the leftists across Europe and Canada have been flocking to New York to study his campaign. So we're about to see a lot more Mamdanis. And you think, well, okay, if I can't do anything on the left anymore, then at least I'll go to the right. But I mean, the right, we just had the interview between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes that was basically given a clean bill of health by the head of the Heritage Foundation. So it's not really very comfortable for us on the right. And it really feels like we're caught between a rock and a hard place. And, those two things are coming together, like, basically on top of us at the moment in real time. It's kind of like the scene in Star Wars where the trash compactor is closing in on them. And that's really, sorry, I'm sure that's not making you feel better to think about that, but I'm at least trying to speak honestly to you, so you know that you're not insane for having these feelings, right? You're not the only person. At the very least, there's me. And so, as we kind of think about diagnosing, like, what happened to our community? How did we become so split? I think that there's something that people who were raised in the American reform and conservative movements experienced and grew up with, that people who did not grow up in that world, who grew up in either Israeli spaces, religious spaces, Sephardic Mizrahi spaces, Russian immigrant spaces, they didn't have this experience or this sensation or this feeling. But those of us who grew up, I was born in 1998, and I was a fourth-generation American Jew. I was a fourth-generation American Jew to go to an Ivy League college, and my grandparents' greatest dream was that I would one day be the first American president. And obviously we know we're never going to have first Jewish American president. And we know now that we're never going to have a Jewish American president. I mean, that's obvious. But it wasn't obvious in 2003, 2004 to people who had lived through the anti-Semitism of the 20th century and seen what happened in the latter half of it. Right? So my grandfather was born in 1925, a very smart kid. He goes to Columbia at the age of 16 when there's a quota on the number of Jewish students who are allowed there. It's only 2%. He used to joke that the Latin above the insignia read, only 2%. That's how you know how many Jews are allowed. And then when I went to college, I mean, Columbia, well, not Columbia, but, other Ivy Leagues like Harvard and Yale were almost 20% Jewish. And to someone who grew up with traditional anti-Semitism in that world of my grandfather, you'd look at that and say, oh my goodness, look how far we've come. This, we can finally be Americans, right? You, my grandson, don't have to wear the yoke of the Jewish identity. You can be a true American. And he was wrong. And it's sad. I miss him very much, but I am glad that he passed before seeing what happened to Columbia. To be perfectly honest with you, Columbia in 2025 is a lot worse than Columbia was in 1945 or 1942 when he started there. And so in the matter of 3 generations, basically, we came from starting with old world anti-Semitism, coming out of it in the latter half of the 20th century to some semblance of I mean, we actually did have Jews running for president, right? Bernie Sanders, I think Joe Lieberman ran for president, if not vice president. So it happened, right? You can't imagine that happening anywhere else. But you can't really imagine it happening in the future either. I mean, you can imagine, like Bernie Sanders, you can see him being elected or at least running, or someone like him running, right? Because at the end of the day, he's more progressive than he is Jewish. And this is really, I think, the emotional point that people in my generation depart on, which is we were raised to be Jewish progressives. We were raised, in the model of our Zionist forebears, the socialist, Zionist, secular forebears, to think about tikkun olam and making the world a better place, and the universalism of Torah and the way that, for the way that we as Jewish people need to relate to just one life, just one person. And we took all of these values and we said, these two things, Judaism and progressivism, they go hand in hand. And so we can be Jewish progressives. And our Jewishness can influence our progressivism, and our progressivism can influence our Judaism. And many, many, many people want that desperately to be true. They desperately want to live in the world of Judaism, progressivism, together forever. However, those of us who have been watching the development of the DSA and the progressive movement, especially globally, not just in the US, have come to realize that the two cannot go hand in hand. They cannot coexist. As long as the long history of progressive anti-Semitism remains in the movement. What I mean by that is progressivism, the idea that we as society, we can move all of human society forward with our actions, comes out of the French Revolution, and it's really popular in the 19th century, and it leads to communism and fascism, which are both progressive ideologies. And people miss this all the time because Hitler was a conservative. Or he wasn't even really actually a conservative. We just think of him as being right-wing, basically, for a number of reasons. But Nazism is a progressive revolutionary philosophy that states that in order to make society better for every human being, vis-a-vis every Aryan, we need to remove all of the people who are holding them back through financial manipulation, banking fraud, whatever it is, the Jews. If you get rid of the Jews, you will make the world a better place. Which is not so dissimilar from saying something like, oh, the world would be a great place if we didn't have any billionaires. Right? Most billionaires are not Jewish, but most people think that most billionaires are Jewish. So you can see this is like, okay, it's not such a far cry from one to the next. And so for those of us who became woke to anti-Semitism and basically abandoned the progressive movement, every single person can probably tell you exactly what moment radicalized them. When did they see something that made them realize that they will never be accepted by the progressives, no matter what they do? And for me, it was May 12th, 2021. It was the beginning of, I don't know exactly what we call that war, but there were Arab uprisings in Israel as a result of a legal struggle over Sheikh Jarrah. There were rockets fired, riots, etc. The most important thing I think that happened was that the Hadids shared an infographic that really laid the foundation for identifying and defining Israelis not as human beings, but as settler colonists. And it's 18 months after that infographic comes out. No, sorry, it's like 30 months. It's a year. It's 2.5 years after that infographic comes out that October 7th happens. And the response that you see from most of the progressive world, right, immediately following October 7th is like a confirmation of this idea. Like, oh yeah, Israelis, well, they're not really people. right? They're this weird status of settler colonists, so actually you can attack them, etc., etc. And, and the thing that's really strange is there were Jews who, on October 8th, found us again, right? They found their people. They realized what was happening in the progressive circles. They were reaching out to people. They were getting upset. They were rallying. They were saying things, etc. And then 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months later, those people are voting for Mamdani and they are criticizing Jews who are afraid of Mamdani, and they are dividing us between each other, and they're supporting, and they're basically doing the dirty work of policing other Jews who are upset with Mamdani, right? And I mean, if you're one of the 30%, you really have no right to speak on behalf of the whole. And what we've been seeing is just like every single Jew who lives in New York who voted for Mamdani and is excited about it is ready to tell you why they did it and why they were right to do it. And those of us who are looking at it, it's like, what happened to you, man? Where you watched October 7th just like me. You watched what happened at Columbia just like me. We understood these things a year ago. What happened? And I think, if I'm being perfectly honest, I think what happened is they got lonely. I think that if we are honest, we'll all admit that we've become a lot lonelier since October 7th, or since whenever it was that we became woke to anti-Semitism. We've become extremely lonely because we lost all of these people we grew up with. I mean, every single person who I had been friends with since middle school is now an anti-Zionist. I have no one left in my life who I can joke about, what things were like when we were at 12. And that's sad. It's not the end of the world. I'll get over it. We'll live. Everyone will live. But I have lost something very personal as a result of that. And I know that you have too. And this loneliness is not so easy to deal with, right? This loneliness is part of the issue is that at every point, if you are not a visible Jew or an Israeli, at every single day you're given an opportunity to end your loneliness, to become a Jew member of the Jewish Voice for Peace, to go and campaign for Mamdani, right? Because if you watch those videos, they look like a lot of fun. The campaign for Mamdani looked like a really great social time. And I wanted to participate. I mean, don't you guys want to make new friends and go out and walk around the street and knock on people's doors and tell them about this exciting new thing? And then you guys all get to go hold hands and walk down the yellow brick road on the way to Oz. Like, it sounds great. It looks fun. I wish I could go. I wish I could be there. And they'd say, well, of course you can come. Of course you can come. Of course you can come. But no, I can't. Because for me, my identity as a Jew is far more important than my identity as anything else. And that includes my political identity. I used to be a progressive. My politics haven't changed very much in terms of how I think about the world, but my understanding of progressivism has changed. And I guess what I'm really trying to say is there is a choice that we all have to make as to which identity we are going to prioritize in this life. Because we live in an identitarian world, a world that is obsessed and fixated on personal identity. You can no longer be an individual to the world. I am not Ted. I am a Zionist. And at the end of the day, you can only choose one identity to prioritize and to present to the rest of the world. You are either your race or your political framework or your sexuality or your gender or your profession, but you cannot be all of these things anymore, which is quite tragic, but you have to pick. And what we saw last night was Jews picking between their Jewish identity and their progressive identity. And the Jews who will tell you very adamantly that voting for Mamdani was as an act of their Jewishness, was a demonstration of their Jewishness, was in line with their Jewishness, whatever the case may be, I believe them. I believe that they are acting as Jews in what they are doing. Because in their heart, they still believe that they can be Jewish progressives. And they still believe in that mythical world that my grandparents believed in 2003 and 2004. The world where you can be a Jewish American, free individual who is not held back by your Jewish identity. And so for them, they see this as their welcome. They are being welcomed as Jewish progressives into the new movement, right? But the price of admission is another Jewish person, or rather, it's the Jewish majority. That if any single person is on, if 30% of the Jews in New York are going to vote for a candidate, that's fine, right? Who cares? At the end of the day, that's actually a very, very small percentage and basically demonstrates that they're an extreme outlier. I have no problem with that. What I object to is the amount of bragging and celebrating and I guess really peacocking to demonstrate, like, look at me. I am a Jew who did this thing. I am the king of the Jews. I am the best Jew. I am the one who's standing on top of the mountain. And it's insulting. It just is insulting, right? Especially when you know that none of these people wear kippot. And you don't have to wear a kippah to be a Jew. I'm not wearing a kippah right now. But I've lived in a world and I've lived in a place where people do wear kippot. And I've worn a kippah myself. And it's a completely different experience than what you live in not wearing a kippah, right? And not being a visible Jew. And it would just be polite for you to take a seat and say, I don't know what it's like to be an Orthodox Jew in New York City, so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to vote for Mamdani because whatever, that's how I feel. But I'm not going to then come out and say, well, I voted for him because I'm a Jew and I'm defending the Jewish people and look at how great it is to be a Jewish progressive, when you just have never experienced the real world of anti-Semitism because you've never looked the part. And that's not a criticism. It's not, you don't need to dress like a Jew to be a Jew. You don't need to walk around in a black hat and tzitzis and payas to understand the experience of anti-Semitism. But you do need to know that if you don't do those things, you don't have that experience. You're missing something, and so maybe, just maybe, you should keep your mouth shut. And we talked about this for so many years with Black Lives Matter and things like that, which is like, if you haven't lived the black experience, don't talk about what the black experience is. So if you haven't lived the anti-Semitic experience, don't talk about what the anti-Semitic experience is. Simple. At least it should be. But I fear that there's actually something that's much darker that's going on. I fear that it's not hubris that is causing them to post all of these things, but actually a fear that they cannot name. Because they think that these people they're fully on board with this progressive movement. And they know how little trust the progressive movement has for Jews these days. Has always had for Jews, maybe. They might know it in their bones. Because if you're a Marxist, you should know the history of Lenin and Trotsky, right? You should know that Trotsky was the primary, preeminent Marxist revolutionary in 1915, 1916, and that Trotsky was more qualified to lead the people, and that Lenin actually suggested that Trotsky be the first premier of the Soviet Union, which caused Trotsky to sort of embarrass and sheepishly demur because he knew that the Russians would never accept a Jew. And no matter how revolutionary Trotsky was, he was never revolutionary enough to get rid of his Jewish identity. And so you have to imagine that people who are self-identified Marxists know this story, right? You have to imagine that. And I can't help feeling like these people know in some way that they're trapped. That the progressive movement has made it very clear that they're kicking out Jews, right and left. They have made a space, however, for anti-Zionist Jews who post social media content. And they've also allotted a certain amount of money for those people, right? And so if you are that person, you're welcome. They've got a great space for you there. And I just can't help feeling like these Jews who identify more as progressive than as Jews, or these people who still identify as progressive Jews because they believe that that's something that you can still be in the modern world, I think they're going to end up meeting a similar fate to the progressives of Europe in the 20th century. Once all of the Orthodox Jews leave New York and the Zionists leave New York and the wealthy Jews leave New York, what's going to happen with all of the cultural Marxist Jews who started making this movement? Right? What's going to happen when the people who were on Mamdani's campaign who thought some of the things he was talking about were not serious start to realize that they're going to happen? And our Jewish world, right, the American Jewish world, is now split. It's split 70-30. The 70% are the religious Jews, the Zionist Jews, the immigrant Jews, the Jews who grew up in progressive backgrounds who then got radicalized by what they saw happening. That's the united 70%. We know what time it is. And then there's the 30% who we feel are voting directly against us and our own interest. But they might not be voting against their own interest. And it's important for us to understand that and to, at least recognize where they're coming from, even if we don't really think that their position is a serious one. At the very least, we have to know what they're trying to do so we can understand the emotions behind their decision making. And so that at the very, if there are people in your life who you personally care about, who matter to you, and you're worried that they're falling down this trap of believing that the progressive movement will tolerate progressive Jews, you can make an intervention. You can reach out to that person and try to talk to them. Personally, I don't recommend it. It's usually a waste of your energy. I basically would say do it if you believe you have no other option. And if you're thinking about this, you'll know what that means. But I also want to flip this idea because it has been really terrifying and really disconcerting to see so many people we grew up with abandon us and throw us under the bus. But I want to try to flip it with a religious idea and with a different approach and thought process to this, which is when the Jews left Egypt, the rabbis teach us that only 1/5 of the Jews actually left. That 4/5 of the Jews, for whatever reason, were too scared to cross the Nile, and they stayed in Egypt. They either died there or they stayed in slavery, and only 20% of the Jews actually made it out of Egypt. And if you think about that number, 20%, the holy remnant, as it's often referred to in different religious texts, is pretty constant in our history. That the transfer of Judaism from one generation to the next, we lose a lot of people along the way, mostly to conversion and assimilation, some to anti-Semitic violence, and some to whatever the case may be. And if you look at the Holocaust, the vast majority of Europe was decimated, not decimated, halved, if not more than halved. And the Jews who made it out of Europe was far from 70%. And so for us to have 70% unity in New York is actually remarkable. It's much more united than the Jews usually are. Usually, we're like 20% of us are together, 20% of us are doing their own thing, 20% of us are hating the other 20, but when you have two Jews, you have three opinions. And yet we have 2 million Jews in New York, and we really only had two opinions. We had the majority opinion, which is that we need to stick together, and this is terrifying, and this is a problem, and we're concerned. And then we have the minority opinion, and that's only 30%. And so maybe this is actually a good sign for the Jews, that we are now united, that we are now actually coming together, and that, yes, we have lost a lot of people along the way, especially for people who share my background in progressive, reform conservative spaces. We have lost way more than 30% of our friends as a result of this. Our personal loss has been much closer to 70 or 80%. But the large-scale numbers show that there's actually more hope. There's more unity among the Jews now than almost ever. And that is something to take solace in as we think about this. And the other thing to take solace in is that this might be the beginning of the sixth Aliyah, the great American Aliyah, potentially the most important step in the creation of the state of Israel. Because until now, everyone who had come to Israel came as for the most part, as poor refugees who had no other options, who had nowhere else to go. They come from Morocco, they come from Syria, they come from war-torn Europe, from Iran, they come from Ethiopia. Where are you going to go? But the Jews in New York, who have tremendous skill set, who have tremendous means, who have tremendous wealth, they have plenty of options. And if they come to Israel, they will bring so much expertise, so much money, so much success, so much strength, that Israel will certainly grow and benefit as a result. And so I'll end with the thought that perhaps this election will turn into the event that sparks the greatest settlement of Jews in Israel since 1948. That we might now be witnessing the beginning of the sixth Aliyah, and it is all thanks to Zoran the Zionist, who, through his attitude towards Israel and towards Zionism and towards the violence that's been done to Jews. Remember, I'm not saying that he's ever actually promoted any of these things. I'm just saying that he and his campaign have made a point to minimize the Jewish concern about anti-Semitic violence. I think that's very much apparent for everybody. In so doing, has greatly incentivized the settlement of the land of Israel. And so we will probably see a huge wave of settlement in Israel as a result of this. There's going to be way more people buying land there and way more Jews moving to Israel. I'm one of them, and I hope that you will come and join us. And so with that, I'd like us to conclude our first episode of This Way Up. I'm your host, Ted Goldstein. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, spread love, spread light. Am Yisrael Chai.